flips me a bad body. So, it's another one, yeah. It's a full strand, yeah. Oh, it's another one, yeah.
Yes, people. So this is another one. We've got a roundup special today, and we've got a bit of a treat here. I know our regular guest, which is Biyenge, he's not feeling well today, so we've got our replacement in Punch Out boxing specialist Ra. Big up to you. And look, we've got another guest as well, and this person just love the work that he's been able to do, especially in HBO. Make sure people you follow what George is doing in his own channel, which is called One Round with George. Before we obviously get into the shows and the introductions, I just wanted to play this from our sponsors, D-Rock Clothing. Yes, people. So that's iBoxingHub in association with D-Rock. So people take advantage of the discount code, which is iBoxingHub24, and you get 40% off everything. Lads, I know it's been, a dark week in boxing. We've had, a few people leave the sport, of course. But George, before we get into the tribute, this is something special. George, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's always good to talk boxing with you and with Rod. It's good to have people that respect and love the sport. That's who I love to talk to, because there's a lot of boxing fans, but there's not a lot of boxing fans that really know and respect the history. And it's good to talk with people who do.
Definitely. And look, the work that you've been able to do in HBO has been truly tremendous. And this is obviously one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show, because you was actually involved in a great production, which did involve, George Foreman, when he made his tremendous, return to boxing. I've actually got a small clip from the production that you obviously created, which is Legendary Nights. It's actually the title of Foreman and Mora.
As a young man, Foreman was regarded as one of the sport's most brutal contenders.
He's not normal. He was never normal.
Frazier has never taken this kind of punishment. And it goes down at the bell.
When he hit Joe Frazier, I thought the world was coming to an end.
It goes down and goes. It goes down again.
That George Foreman intimidated the hell out of a lot of opponents. He would just come in, growl, throw punches, and go home.
George was once as feral a figure or as demonic a figure as Mike Tyson. Easy.
George was kind of a freak. George was unusual. George was one of a kind.
If you could survive 1 or 2 rounds with me, which would be a lot of pain and probably a lot of heartbreak in your life, because not only could I hurt you for those few rounds, 2 or 3 rounds in my previous career, I could really do damage to your body physically and your brain.
George, big up to you. You was obviously a part of the production. You was the senior production assistant for the Tales. Look, people, I used to binge watch these series throughout my time in university, college, which you guys call it. And Ra, please tell me you've watched Legendary Nights, the series, please.
I haven't yet, but I'll tell you what, George,
that's okay. You're in for a treat.
That's the thing, yeah. That just brought some beautiful memories back. Incidentally, you don't know this, but a lot of my media colleagues here in the UK know. My trademark is I wear an American wide brim boater hat. It's a bit of a joke now. People laugh at it, and they always say, "What's with this hat?" And I say, "Well, I'm trying to recreate the look of the legendary Burt Sugar, the
Oh
one-time
man,
editor of the Ring magazine. I used to love that, that 1940s American reporter's look. I always like to try and recreate that. But I bought the wrong type of hat. But after buying it, I thought, well, I've got to wear it now. And it's become my trademark. But that's the story behind it. Yeah, seeing that a legendary...
That's a good trademark. I was lucky enough. I got to interview Burt a few times, and he always had that hat on, and he always had the cigar in his mouth. That was just that was his trademark and a staple. But it's pretty cool, like that. I got to talk to him about boxing on camera and off camera. He was a good dude. He was a good dude.
Yeah, it's powerful. I was just saying that, these series, people, if you haven't watched it, please just type on YouTube. Everyone's, got clips and they've put it out there. But HBO actually produced the series, and, George was a part of it. And look, just in terms of the whole story, the comeback story, these are obviously one of the memories that George has obviously left behind. But just give us a take of, like, how's just producing like these series, like what was the process, and how did you guys come up with the concept?
Well, there's a sports Emmy right behind my head somewhere that's from that show. I helped to come up with that idea. I was only a production assistant back then. I helped to come up with the idea. It was coming up on it might have been 30 years of boxing or 40 years of boxing on HBO. And I said, we should do something special instead of short little segments. Let's do something special on some of the great fights. So we picked 12 fights and did 12 shows, and they were incredible. And I got to work on every single one of them. The main ones I worked on were Tyson and Douglas, Mike Tyson, Buster Douglas, and Mike Tyson and Lennox Lewis. And the ironic thing is that I was always pushing for HBO to do more of these Legendary Nights shows. And by the time I was a production assistant on this first round, in a few years I became a producer. We were going to do another round of Legendary Nights, and among the shows was going to be Holyfield versus Foreman, and I was going to produce that. And for budgetary reasons or whatever, we didn't do it, and it was always it was a layup. It was something that we should have done. We didn't, but at least we got this first one done. The process, it took about a year, and we literally had a team of people. We weren't even in the HBO building. They moved us to another building downtown in New York. It was completely separate, and we worked on these for a year. And Ra, when you see these shows, I mean, they're over 20 years old now, but they stand up. I just rewatched Foreman more after you sent me the link, and it brings back
beautiful memories, isn't it?
Beautiful memories of working on the show. But really, Rob, we were talking off camera the night that Foreman beat Moorer. If you're a fan, a sports fan, you know where you were, and I know where I was. And I remember those feelings that I'll never forget. And it was like a dream when it happened. Hollywood writes scripts. Rocky was a script. Rocky becomes heavyweight champion, but this was real. Michael Moore didn't get up, and George Foreman was 45, and he became heavyweight champion. And we all saw it. I saw it live, and it'll always be a part of history. He was an icon, and he seemed to have lived a beautiful life. Yeah. And if people don't believe that you can change as a person, all you have to do is look at George Foreman, who he was when he was young to what he became when he was older. He touched a lot of people's lives, and I wish I got to know him better. I just know the memories that I have with me. They're special. HBO started, their first fight ever was Frazier versus Foreman in 1973. So he lived a great life in the ring and out of the ring, and it's sad. It's a sad time.
It is a sad time, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this tribute show, because I want people to, straight after this, type on YouTube Legendary Nights, and I want people to really experience the moments, especially growing up. He was alive at the time when I was watching it, and I felt those emotions. So the fact that people now that he's passed away, of course, they can go back and watch and relive that moment. So I just want to play this last little clip from this show. Look, I just really want to make sure that people get onto it because it's truly amazing stuff. So this is actually near enough the ending of the Legendary Nights.
Somebody once asked me if is George Foreman winning the heavyweight title at age 45 tougher than Jack Nicklaus winning the Masters at age 46. And as much as I love Jack Nicklaus, nobody was hitting Jack Nicklaus. Michael Moorer was still punching George Foreman.
And once again, heavyweight champion of the world, Big George Foreman.
Michael Moorer later recaptured a heavyweight belt, but lost it to Evander Holyfield. George Foreman had never openly sought specific redemption for his demise against Ali and Zaire, but it's revealing that he chose to wear the same trunks on this night that he had worn in the jungle 20 years before.
Powerful.
Wow.
Absolutely. Look, wow, what are you saying? You have to watch it straight after, right? I'm giving you enough over here, man.
I echo what Lucy in the comments saying, that everything just sounded better in those days.
Yep. Yeah, big up to Lucy all the way from the States. I just want to read out her comment because she's a massive fan. Appreciate you, Lucy, as well. I grew up sitting on my dad's lap watching old fights. Everything sounds better with Jim Lampley. Yep, I agree. Larry Merchant and George Foreman calling it. I was sickened to hear he passed. I know, Lucy. And Eric, big up to you. Crossroads and Boxing with CJ on this channel. He's obviously saying rest in peace, George Foreman. And guys, make sure you head over to George's channel, One Round with George. He obviously sat down and spoke to Jim Lampley about his book. So look, people, I'm going to make sure I'm going to add the link to his channel so that you could tune into the show. But George, I'm sure it's a roller coaster kind of moment because you just spoke to Jim and
just spoke to Jim. And obviously George Foreman was still alive, but the name of his book is It Happened. And it's that iconic call that Jim Lampley said when George Foreman became heavyweight champion again. So Jim was talking to me about one of his highlights was there's a columnist in New York named Bob Raceman. And Bob Raceman years ago voted Jim Lampley, Larry Merchant, George Foreman as the best trio to call a sporting event of all time, which was his opinion. It was great to hear those three call fights because, first of all, there was no one like George Foreman calling a fight. He was just so entertaining, and he and Larry would get into arguments all the time. George always defended the fighters. Larry would be kind of hard on fighters, but he was giving his opinion, and George defended the fighters. So the three of them just had a really good, when people click, you know it. Sometimes you hear some commentators together in whatever sport, they don't really click. But those three clicked. And even if they didn't agree on something, it was entertaining. And time just goes fast because those were the three guys when I got to HBO working, they were the ones that were there. And it's funny, Jim Lampley was the center of that team, and then a few years later, he was with Max Kellerman and Roy Jones, and then you had Andre Ward, and then there was Emmanuel Stewart. So, just like all-star teams, all-star teams,
dream team. No, exactly. I echo exactly what you're saying, and big up to Chloe in Living Color. Absolutely love the channel. She's one of the newest additions to the team. I didn't want to kind of push it out there, but I have to. So she's obviously saying great show. RIP George Foreman. Chloe, 100% agree with you, and we can't wait to work some magic with your shows coming up. Look, I think George Foreman, we have to agree, was truly someone that was special. In those two clips, I kind of showed the first part of George Foreman, which was the fearsome fight, and then you kind of saw what happened to him afterwards. And what a great story. And it's obviously a sad day, but I wanted this to be more of a celebration because he's great things in the sport. He's been a great man. He's been very successful as well, and we have to, give up props to him and condolences to the family as well, because I know it's a very, very difficult period, but let's remember him for the great moments.
One of the more like iconic moments with him wasn't even to me when he was fighting. It was when Riddick Bowe and Andrew Golota had that first fight at Madison Square Garden. The riots and all the craziness that happened. Golota gets disqualified, and I think it was off camera, but at some point there was a literal riot in Madison Square Garden, and some thugs were like coming close to Lampley and those guys, and you hear George Foreman's voice saying, "Don't do that, son. Don't do that." And whoever it was that was about to do something didn't. And if you ever talk to Jim Lampley, he's always said that George Foreman might have saved their lives that night because he had so much respect that he just told people, and they were out of control, those people in the Garden that night. All of them, they were out of control. And George Foreman saved those guys. He saved those guys, and his life is an easy one to celebrate. Everything, if you watch his movie, that was his life. He became a minister. I mean, he was out of boxing for 10 years. Then he comes back, and he's a joke, and he's a completely different personality, eating cheeseburgers. But then I remember when he fought Holyfield, everybody thought, oh, this old fat guy's going to get knocked out. And when he fought Holyfield, he battled Holyfield. And then he comes back and beats Michael Moore with the same trunks he had on when he fought Ali. So it's like it sounds like you're making it up, but it's real life. What a life he had. And I got to interview him once in China, of all places. And when I contacted him through his son, all his sons are named George. They all have nicknames, but they're all Georges. And my name's George. So when I interviewed him, I said, George, thank you. Your son George set it up, and I laughed with him about all his names. And I was like, oh, by the way, my name's George too. So he laughed. So I felt good that I had the same name as him. His life as sad as it is, his life's an easy one to celebrate. And you talk about legendary nights, but When We Were Kings, that documentary, amazing. Champions Forever is another amazing doc about Foreman and Ali and Larry Holmes and Frazier and Norton. There it is right there. And that documentary is touching. His life is an easy one to celebrate. And then the Foreman Grill. Now you tell me, in the UK, was it as big in the UK? Because everybody
it's massive.
Foreman Grill.
Massive. It's massive in the UK, and just from my understanding as well, and correct me if I'm wrong because it's before my time, I believe Sugar Ray Leonard was offered that deal. He said no. And I also believe that Hulk Hogan was offered that deal as well, and he said no.
Wow.
They're both probably thinking, why shouldn't we do it? Why didn't we do it at the time?
You know what? Some things are meant to be. It was meant to be the Foreman Grill. It just was. What a life.
Frida Foreman was a fighter as well, and she passed a few years ago.
Yeah.
Wow. And big up to Al Booga. He's saying wow. I don't know why you're saying wow. Maybe you're saying wow because we've got George here. But no, Ra. Let me just ask you just very quickly, man, just from this whole George tribute, what's been your favorite moment, or what would you remember George for?
I think like older gents, the Rumble in the Jungle, I think arguably is the biggest fight in history. Would you agree with that, George?
You can argue that I absolutely agree. One of the biggest fights in the history of the sport.
For me that's such an iconic moment culturally. It transcended sport. And again, just a couple of years ago, I don't know if you know about this, George. Here in the UK, we had this live immersive play about the Rumble in the Jungle, here in London.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was invited as media, so I got to dress up properly in the 1970s suit, pinstripe suit with the hat, and I had the little label press put in. And
Perfect.
It was absolutely amazing. The event was amazing. The sets, it made you really feel like you were back there in the 1970s Kinshasa. Truly Tre, his parents are from Kinshasa originally, so he might be.
Yeah, my mum. Funny enough, she's got a funny story about that. So she was obviously quite young when the fight was happening back home. But what she was saying is that it was just happening everywhere. All the local pubs in the area were streaming the fight. Everyone's excited as well. George Foreman was actually the villain coming into that fight, and Ali had memorials everywhere. There was like everyone's just supporting Ali, but like it's just crazy how that moment he's become a villain at that moment, and then years later, he has his moment, and he's now the people's champion in that situation. So great moment, Rock. Great moment as well.
And what a beautiful thing that Foreman and Ali became such good friends.
Yes,
they became such good friends. It's beautiful. Those are the beautiful things about the sport. About the battles that they had, but I love to hear about the stories and the friendships that they develop. Not every fighter becomes close, but they all form a bond. And Ali and Foreman, they had a real bond, and that's you hear about those things, and it's special.
It is truly special, and also I know it's just been about George. Once again, RIP to George, and condolences to the family. We also lost Colin Hart, who was a Hall of Fame boxing journalist. He was 89 years old. Lost him. George, I know it's across the pond, but did you know? I'm sure you knew who.
Absolutely, I have his book. I knew who he was. I know the people who love boxing and talk about boxing, and I love the history of the sport. You know what? Last night I was at I live in Connecticut, USA, so there was a small boxing card going on Long Island. And I went to the fight, and there was about 3,000 people there, and they announced a former fighter who was in the crowd named Junior Jones. Junior Jones was a great fighter. Beat Marco Antonio Barrera twice.
Yep, I remember.
I don't think anyone, I was cheering. I don't think anyone knew who he was.
Yep.
But if Colin was there, he would have known who he was. And that's why I love these people who embrace the history, because it really is a beautiful history, the sport of boxing. It's got a beautiful history, and not many people know it. And last night, and it's not their fault, the fans, for not knowing who Junior Jones was, but I just wish more people knew, because when they said that, I said, oh shit, that's Junior Jones. He was a great fighter, and I don't think many people in there knew him. But again, Colin, if he was there, he would have been sitting next to me cheering for Junior Jones. And he loved it. He loved the sport, and his stories were amazing. He's got Foreman stories. He was there in Africa.
Yeah, he was there. He was one of the guys that actually called for Ali to win that fight, but the odds-on favorite at the time was Foreman because of what he was doing, that fight with Frazier. And when he was actually saying, look, I think he could do it in the 9th round, because Foreman in his previous fights, when he goes late, he seems to tire. So that was the game plan. It worked, of course, and I'm just so happy that we could honor these people. And big up to Lucy, just reminding people.
Yes.
The great Junior Poison Jones, definitely, and CJ. Big up to CJ. Crossroads in boxing with Eric. He's obviously saying big up to the iBoxingHub family. I'm finally mastering the tech and the internet, bro. You are here. You're alive, and I think, George, you mentioned this as well off air. Livingston Bramble also passing as well. So boxing this week has been a bit, crazy in terms of the passing. But let's honor these fighters, these warriors, and celebrate their great moments, of course, because it's what we cherish.
Bramble was a shock, because I think he was 64, and no cause of death was given. I used to, when I was a kid, I have them behind me. I have scrapbooks, boxing scrapbooks. That's when boxing was in newspapers and on TV, regular TV here in the States. Livingstone Bramble, the first time that he was on my radar is when he knocked out the great Boom Boom Mancini. And Boom Boom Mancini was supposed to win that fight. Bramble was not supposed to win. Bramble beat him in a rematch. And he looked like he was going to be a dominant lightweight. And then he got knocked out by Edwin Rosario in 2 rounds. And he hung around, but his career was never the same. Battled a lot of great fighters. He was a great fighter. And George Foreman, I read a quote, tying it back to George. When Muhammad Ali was close to death, someone reached out to George Foreman just because I think they were doing an obituary. And George said, look, Muhammad lived a great life, but he knows he's made peace with God. And he knows that death comes for all of us, even the great Muhammad Ali, and it does. But Bramble just seemed to come out of nowhere. Only 64 years old. I don't know the circumstances, but he's another fighter who I think he's a bit unsung, but in his prime was just a devastating lightweight and a with the dreads and just he was kind of an off-key character, you know. He was fun to watch, and I hope his family is well, and I hope that he got to enjoy his life. That's all you can really hope for.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's like I was saying, it's sad, but at the same time, we could obviously use platforms like this to celebrate great moments that they created for us, because fighters, we see them as they are heroes at the end of the day. So what they do in the ring, we're not talking about idolizing or wanting to be like them, but there are moments that you see fights where, especially, we're obviously going to talk about the comeback, we have to, because in that fight Mora was absolutely perfect for 9 rounds. I would say 9 rounds, it was perfect, boxed well. But let me ask you both, do you think, because Mora did say in that documentary, I know he was quite angry during that time, he said, look, he landed a lucky punch, that's what happened, but do you think Foreman was just so experienced that he was just setting him up always for the trap? That's what I wanted to ask you both. So Rod, to start us off, man, what are you saying? Do you think it was a...
No, that definitely weren't a lucky punch. Mora was the first heavyweight champion who was a southpaw. We know that the straight right hand through the middle, that's the southpaw's bane. I think the late Glyn Leach, who was the editor of Boxing Monthly, which was one of my favourite publications growing up here in the UK, in his post-fight report, he described Foreman as being like a locomotive that chugs slowly into station. That's what he was like over the distance. Yeah, he was by that point quite slow and one-paced, but like a locomotive coming into the station on the platform, it's going to slowly come in. Nothing's going to stop it. Yeah, and I think that's what Foreman was like over the distance. He would just plod away and just be this immovable force, and eventually he was in perfect position to land that right hand. Mora had been he'd been looking shaky chin-wise at heavyweight. He'd come up from light heavyweight. So I think when a big hitter like Foreman did nail him, that was always going to happen.
But do you think also, and George, I'm obviously going to go to you next. Do you think that Mora kind of fought the fight that George wanted him to fight, which was in the inside with him? Because I think Teddy was actually saying to him in the corner, box and move, but Mora was doing something completely different, because for 9 rounds he's boxing him, and I know Mora was thinking, he's telling me box and move, but I'm absolutely smashing this guy. So George, what are you saying about that?
I agree with everything Ross said. it wasn't a lucky punch. Now, could he have run out of time? He could have, but he didn't. And if you hear Teddy Atlas, Teddy really is angry as Michael Moore was about that. Teddy Atlas put it into perspective. And you talked about what he was telling him in the corner. Teddy could see what George was trying to do. He could see it. And Jim Lampley, everyone could see it. He was throwing left hooks to make him move into his right. And like Jim said, it happened. There was nothing lucky about that. Some people over the years have said, oh, Michael Moore could have gotten up. No, he couldn't have. You could see his lip ballooning with the overhead shot. His lip was just getting bigger by the second.
It was good.
I don't blame Michael Moore for being upset and angry, and I think he's less angry now about it. But at the time, I can't blame him because he was almost perfect for almost 10 rounds. He was almost perfect until he wasn't. And George knew what he had to do. Teddy Atlas knew what he had to do to beat Michael Moore, and he did it. That right hand, and it shows you the power of George Foreman. That wasn't a looping right hand. He didn't pull that back like a bow and arrow.
Yep.
He threw a jab and then a beautiful straight right hand, and he anesthetized Michael Moore, and the rest is history. But I would have been angry too. I would have been, at the time, I would have been angry as well. Now, George, I think, was always good at telling a story. I don't think he really meant to go 10 rounds. And, I mean, George was getting beat up. I think if George could have done this in the third or fourth round, he would have. But he became a great storyteller. I don't think he wanted to take all those shots for 10 rounds and do it. But I think he had a plan, and he knew if he could land that punch, he could end the fight. And the really ironic thing is Gil Clancy replaced Foreman on that telecast because Foreman was fighting.
Yeah.
And seconds before, he said, I think the power of George Foreman has been debunked tonight or something. Basically saying, I don't think he's got the power that people think. And then he did. And then he knocked out Michael Moore.
That's why it's so legendary, that statement. It happened.
It really is. It's so legendary. It's so legendary.
Big up to everyone in the chat as well, man. Just want to read a few comments. So Lucy's obviously saying, yeah, Moore didn't have a great chin at heavyweight. He might have been an all-time great had he stayed at light heavyweight, which is true. It happened. Immortal words are heard on my TV screen. R.I.P. George. And big up to the classy one. We call him our Jim Watt of iBoxingHub. So he was formerly, now he has Red Corner Boxing. So big up to him. And Lucy is saying Moore just got inducted into the Hall of Fame, which is absolutely tremendous. So big up. And that punch was the reason George came back 2-time. Yes, I 100% agree with you. So big up to Mr. Neutral. And sorry, Ra, you was actually about to say something.
I was actually wanting to say, again, I remember the reports at the time, like when the Moore of the Foreman fight was announced. Moore was actually quite salty about Big George, because when he won the title against Evander Holyfield, Big George and commentary was very critical of his passive performance. I don't know if you recall how Teddy Atlas was having to practically coax him to go out. But Big George was really critical of his performance and really critical of the decision. He was saying that he didn't deserve that. I wonder whether that saltiness, he took that into the ring with him a bit, as he said, Trey, maybe he thought, well, 10 rounds, I still haven't been knocked out. The old man isn't going to get me. Let me hurt him for pouring spawn on my heavyweight title win, and paid the price for it himself. I wonder, George, did you ever hear anything about that? Was Moore really salty about George's assessment of him as a champion?
Oh, he was very easy to offend back then, and you'll see when you watch Legendary Nights. He was very offended. He was offended that Teddy Atlas became such a big star for the motivation he gave him in the Holyfield fight. But one of the people they put on the screen that Foreman wanted this fight because of Moore's chin, That's true. He saw something in Moore he thought he could beat. He politicked for this fight. George Foreman hadn't fought in over a year when he got this title shot. A lot of people said he doesn't deserve the title shot. Look, this is 2025. The word deserve and boxing, they don't go together. People get title shots all the time without deserve them. George Kambosos is about to get a title shot again and doesn't deserve one. So deserve is a different word. Yeah. But he was, George Foreman saw something in him and said, if I land on this guy, I can beat him. I was rooting for George from the moment the fight was signed. And I'm watching that fight live. I mean, pumped up. But as the rounds went on and George was taking a beating, I remember sinking back in my seat. And at some point around the 8th or 9th round, I'm thinking, oh, man, I hope George doesn't get hurt. But he didn't. He didn't. He became champion. So, yes, Ra, he was angry. He'll tell you now he was very angry back then about everything. But, you know, he might not have had the best chin, but he was a 2-time heavyweight champion and not a natural heavyweight. And, yes, last year he was inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame. So, what a career. How many people can say they were heavyweight champion not only once but twice? He beat the great Evander Holyfield. He battled with the great George Foreman. Unfortunately, he now is a part of history because George Foreman was 45 years old and became the oldest heavyweight champion ever.
Yeah, I'm just laughing at Mr. Neutral's quote here, which is not what you deserve, what can.
There you go.
Basically, for
that's what it is. There's no deserving in boxing.
Up, man.
Right.
No deserving in boxing at all. So, yeah, it is a thing that's happening quite often. But look, at the same time, I think because of George's star power, you can allow him to, have this fight. And that fight brought bums to seats at the end of the day. And boxing is all about the dollars and cents. And if you're able to promote it right, and look, we saw history being made. What I wanted to find out, George, is what were the odds on Foreman to win at the time?
I've tried to look that up, and I haven't been able to find them. I do know Moore was the favorite. I don't know how big a favorite he was, but remember, you guys know the history, but a lot of people that don't know, again, Foreman hadn't fought in over a year, and when he did fight, he got beat pretty easily by Tommy Morrison, who became a boxer and a mover in that fight. Why? Why would you stand there in front of George Foreman like Michael Moore did? So he hadn't fought in over a year and lost his last fight. So he was a big underdog. But you talked about the star power. George was a star. That place with the MGM was packed. It was packed, and most of those people were there because of George Foreman. So he got that title shot because of who he was. But he was a huge underdog. I know that. But guess what? Whoever bet on George Foreman, they made some money that night.
They must have made some big money. And one of the best heavyweight fights I've seen Michael Moore. So Cooper's even saying that. Big up 18-month layoff after Morrison for the vacant WBO belt. So thank you, Mr. Neutral, for also confirming that. So the odds must have been crazy. It would have been interesting to see what kind of numbers there. I don't know what $10 would have got you for that kind of numbers, but hey.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't 40-1 like Tyson and Douglas. It wasn't that bad.
Man.
George, can I ask you, just on that, you mentioned there how Big George politicked his way into the fight. A couple of people there mentioned, like Mr. Neutral mentioned, Don King. What was the political situation there at the time? Because I vaguely, this from my youth, trying to recall what the reporters were saying, that Mora was seen as a suspect champion. And at the time, Don King had maneuvered his fighters, I think it was Tucker and maybe McCall, into the mandatory positions. And maybe the Duvers were a bit concerned, like, oh, we could end up losing the belts again to Don King, who'd sort of they'd managed to wrestle part of the control of the heavyweight division off of him. But King, in his classic way, had maneuvered his fighters into mandatory position. You were at HBO. Do you know what was the line of thinking there? Was it a case of like, well, we want to be careful about who we match this guy Mora with, because, and there was even talk, people at the time were saying they want Mora to get bumped off, because if he doesn't, then the Don King fighter would just beat him and he'd get control of all the belts again. Do you know what was the line of thinking there at HBO at the time?
Well, I wasn't with HBO then, but I do know that what I've read is Michael Moore, they wanted to get the biggest money fight for him. And and it was George Foreman. Now, Don King, I can remember when in the 80s when Don King he had every single heavyweight. It didn't matter who the champion was. There were times he had every single big fighter in every single division. So it didn't really matter who had the belt or who didn't, because Don King had it in the end. Tyson was in jail at the time. So yeah, I don't think they were really worried about Don King getting all the belts, because I think what I remember at that time is it was just a given that when Tyson got out, he was going to get all the belts. He was going to reclaim all his belts. So whoever had the belts now, it didn't matter, because Iron Mike was going to come back and clean it up. But Foreman was with Top Rank. So I really think that fight, they put it together because Moore had beat Holyfield. And again, Holyfield claimed he had a bad heart and all these reasons why he lost. So I think that they wanted to give him some confidence and a massive paycheck. So they figure, you know what? Let him fight George. He'll get a lot of money. He'll beat George. He'll gain his confidence back, and then move on from there. It didn't happen.
Yeah,
it didn't happen.
It's different. It happened. It happened. So, yeah, it's just a great moment, and it's obviously good to do these tributes with both of you guys. George, since this is the roundup, it's been a while since you were on. I did want to discuss a few little bits with you, in fact. So I wanted to get your perception, in fact, of Fatal Fury, Eubank versus Ben. We're talking about Don King, for example. I believe for that fight at Old Trafford, which was the father's second fight, I believe Don King had a agreement with the winner. So whoever wins that fight, he signs them. And I remember after the fight was called a draw, Barry must have saw Don King, and Don King was rubbing his hands. Yeah, but then Barry said, "Look, it's a draw, so I get to keep my fight out." And yeah, just guys, what's your thoughts, George? Just in terms of this fight, is this a fight that's generating traffic in the States where you are? Are people talking about it? It'll be interesting to kind of get your thoughts on the.
100%. It is getting a lot of press and interest, especially because of the egg slap heard around the world. That press conference and that egg slap to Conor Benn's face. Things like that in boxing, they might be looked down upon, and he might have crossed the line. But guess what? That makes people interested. It does. And I watched the second press conference because of what happened in that first one. So, yeah, it's now, will the fight live up to the hype? I don't know. But look at the legendary names of those fighters. Their fathers are Hall of Famers. They're great fighters. And to have the sons in a fight of this magnitude with the bad blood always sells. It does. I like it when Alexis Arguello was a great fighter, very respectful. He would hug his opponents after he knocked them out. Never said a bad word about anyone, and that was great. But bad blood sells. When fighters don't like each other, it sells. And this fight is going to be massive. These guys are going to make a lot of money, and I'm looking forward to the fight. Conor Benn, you guys know more than me all the things that he's gone through, all the allegations with drugs and everything else. They're going to make a lot of money, and this fight is definitely because of that press conference, that made it 10 times bigger than what it was before.
Yeah, definitely. Controversial.
Slapped him with an egg. I mean, who does that?
100,000 as well. What do you think? That's a bit much, though. They overly charged Junior, in my opinion.
Oh,
I'm a Junior.
The fine?
Yeah, £100,000, which is just
lot.
over $100,000 on your end. So,
well, you know something? Maybe that is a stiff penalty, but I think what he did is going to earn him much more than that 100,000 that he's being fined. But how did he get through a whole press conference with an egg in his pocket? That's what I want to know, how he did that. I mean, how do you do that? I've never seen, just when you think you've seen everything in boxing, I never saw anyone I never saw anyone in life slapped in the face with an egg. Maybe you guys have. I haven't.
No, we haven't seen it. No, to be honest, we haven't seen it. And credit to Junior for coming up with the idea to kind of sneak the eggs in through his pouches and somehow maneuver it where he leant in and used the other hand to. It's just genius, man. So big up to him. He's obviously created a lot of buzz for the fight, man. So,
yes.
Look, I can't even lie to you, George, and it's a bad thing to say, but look, I'm a fan of Junior. Junior, I'm a massive fan. I've met him in person. I've done some work with the family before, and I think he will humble young Conor. I don't think Conor's been in fights yet that can warrant him a chance of beating someone.
I agree.
Weight classes above him. We saw him at 154 in the States. The power didn't carry. He's originally a welterweight fighter, so it'll be interesting to see what he comes in the night. I didn't even actually get your live views of who wins this fight. We know we talk on WhatsApp, of course, man. But what's your live views? Who you got winning this fight, man?
Listen, you've got good personal experiences with Eubank. You know me, I haven't. There's been times on fight events when I've gone as media where I found him rude. Okay, fair enough. I guess fighters treat media and fans differently, even if I am what you'd call fan media. I'm not a professional journalist, but because of that, I'm Team Conor on this. Because
he's done it. He's done it. Why?
I've met him in person. He's been perfectly courteous with me.
Why have you got Conor winning? We need to hear this, isn't it, George? We need to hear
it's quite simple. I just think at 35, he looks like he's lost that edge. In recent performances, he looks like he's lost a step. And I think making weight at 35 with a rehydration clause, I think that's going to cost him. And I think the youth and vigor of Conor that'll catch up to him.
See, it's intriguing, like what you guys are just talking about there. And look, I have biases too, right? Like we all have them. Like Trey, you said you dealt with Junior, so you know him, you like him. That's your guy, so I get it. But what you guys just talked about, why you think each guy's going to win, that's what makes it big, because there's going to be a lot of people talking about that. Conor, I don't think he doesn't have the resume that Junior has, but will that matter? I don't know, because he's younger. It's intriguing. And I wonder, fighting with anger, you really can't do. Conor seems awfully angry still about that whole egg incident. Now, will he tone it down? I'm sure he's a professional. I think he knows you can't fight angry. But just what you two were talking about, that's why the fight's going to sell. Because there's reasons why you both have your guy winning. So, and the beautiful thing about it is the only way you can find out is when they fight the fight. Exactly. And it just makes it bigger.
Exactly. That's why people are going to tune in.
That's why people are going to tune in. Now that we obviously are on that subject of Riyadh season, of course, look, we've spoken in the past, George, in our last show. And big up to Mr. Neutral. He's obviously saying great show, gents. Appreciated hearing George's stories. Got a goal, but cheers. Look, big up to you, bro. Look, Riyadh season, there's been a lot happening. And as you know, George, we've obviously seen the news about the potential boxing league. I just kind of wanted to just get your thoughts on, do you think it can work for boxing in the future? Is it a good thing? Is it wanted to get your thoughts?
Well, it's been called a boxing league, but I saw Dana White saying it's not a league. It's just another promotion. You hear all sorts of stories that they want to take over the sport, but then Turkey came out and said, no, we'll work with promoters, we'll work with the sanctioning bodies. Very different from what they said in the beginning. We all know the problem in boxing. There's no unity. It's not a league. It's not. It's the Wild Wild West, and everybody just wants to make more money than you. Oscar works with Eddie when it's good for both of them, but if they can work together and shit on Bob Arum at Top Rank, they'll do it. You know, they are all out for themselves. It's business, and the purpose of a business is to make money. So we all know if the sanctioning bodies, which I hate and I think they suck, if they were all gone and there was a league, it could work. But how do you get it to that? You know, people thought Turkey was going to just put out this massive amount of money and I don't know, buy the organizations. I don't know. I'm curious. I think that I do know Dana White loves boxing. He's a huge boxing fan. We'll see. I think, will it be good for boxing? I don't think it'll be bad for boxing. Al Heyman, when he came in hot. And people were saying, oh, he's going to take over. They're going to have their own belts, and it's going to be all about Heyman. And that didn't turn out to be true. And if you believe what you read, PBC may not be long for boxing. So Turkey makes fights we want to see. He has the ability to do that, and he does that because he's paying people. Now, TKO came out with that. Didn't they come out with like a pay scale of what they were going to pay?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, every fighter that saw that said, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. You're not going to get fighters with this. Was that pay scale right? I don't know. I know that, let me tell you, Dana White, he's got some heavy hitters behind him, and he's with Turkey. So you're talking serious money. You're talking about smart people. I hope it's a good thing for boxing. I do. I really do. We all know the problems. It needs to be a league. It needs to be like any other professional entity, but it's not. I just don't. It's hard for me to see that ever happening in our lifetime. It's just they're too entrenched in their own positions of power. And the WBA, they make money. The WBC makes money. All the promoters make money. They work together when it benefits them. They don't work together necessarily to make boxing better, but I get it. It's how the business is set up, and you want to try to make money in boxing. So I want it to be a good thing for boxing, but the talk at first, all the bluster about how they're going to be a league and they're going to take over everything, and it doesn't seem to be. Turkey even said that's not really what this is about. But we'll see. I hope it's good for boxing. I do. There's some smart people over there, and there's deep pockets. So we'll see.
Yes, we'll see. It's season time. What you saying, Rob?
Just want to say something. Want your opinion on it. This whole talk of a league, like all boxing fans, I've dreamed of it as well. But one aspect of it that we know in the back of our minds is a factor, but we don't talk about it enough, is the damaging nature of this sport, which is why I think you could never have a league. Because in any other sport, as you said, like the football, the NBA, whatever, everyone plays everyone. Whoever's got the most wins at the end of the season, they're the champions. But the nature of this sport is every time you get hit over the head, your body's diminishing irreparably. Your brain cells don't regenerate. In football, you pull a muscle, your ligaments go. After a bit of surgery, 6 months later, whatever, you can play again. But because of that, the nature of this sport is to try and minimize the brain damage whilst maximizing your earnings. You want to only get those really hard fights when you're going to get really paid for it. And you consider divisions the toughest division, say something like the 154-pound division, just red hot right now. But imagine those top 8 or 10 guys all fought each other. I mean, you're talking 7 elite level fights, back to back to back. I mean, you wouldn't be the same person by the end of it. I mean,
right.
That.
Well, you're right, and there's no off season. True in boxing, but they've done it like the Super 6 tournament in the 80s. HBO and Don King, they had the heavyweight, tournament that Tyson ultimately won. But you're right, like Raw. It's how do you pull all that together? Also, how do you pull all those top fighters together? You're right. It's to call it a league, and again, Dana White. I heard at least one interview where he said, it's not a league, it's a promotion. How do you, I don't know how you pull something like that together, because there is no off season, and those tournaments like the Super 6 tournament,
they were great.
It seemed like it took 10 years.
Yeah.
They were good though. I'm not gonna lie, George. They were good. The Super 6 tournament, just seeing that, I think the Super 6 tournament allowed Andre Ward to have that extra platform to show the world that look, he is excellent. So it's just, I agree with you. The schedule does drag it out, but maybe with Dana White they could do something similar where the schedule's not really dragging out like that.
Well, you know what, Trey, if you get that supposed, again, I don't know if it is, but what they were going to pay, it had a whole pay scale, like up to championship fights. I don't know if that's real or not, but if you interview any pro fighters who have made good money, they'll look at that and they'll laugh and they'll say that's not going to work. That money. And Paulie Malignaggi, who I know Paulie pretty well. Paulie has a bias against Dana White. He can't stand him, but he says he's cheap. He says he doesn't pay the UFC fighters, but that's why you have Turkey, because Turkey's got the deep pockets. But then when they announced that pay scale didn't seem to be that impressive to fighters, and I'm not talking about fans. I'm talking about fighters that I've seen quotes on as saying that's not going to work. That pay scale, I'm not doing that. So again, I don't know if that's real. We'll see. It just has to play out. They are in boxing now, and they will do some things, and whatever they're going to do, it's going to be big, you would think. I just don't know how it'll play out. I just don't see, and there's no unity in boxing with the business. I love the fighters and the stories. You just get in the business of boxing, it's dirty and it's grimy. And Raw, you talked about fighters want to maximize the amount of money they get. Of course they do, because like you guys have probably talked to fighters, and I won't say who the fighters I've talked to. I've interviewed some fighters who are still in their 20s, but you can hear the way they talk and they're changed. You can hear the damage in their voice, and in 10, 20 years their lives might not be very good. So boxing is all about fighters going broke and dying destitute. The great Donald Curry, he's had issues with his health and his finances, but that's the story with 90% of the fighters. You hear broken-hearted stories. So yes, I don't blame any of these guys for getting the money that they want. And Ra, you're right. You want to maximize. I don't blame them. You're getting punched in your head for a living. It's a rough sport.
Pay them, man. Pay them. I think they deserve it, especially for the entertainment that we get as fans, and we don't realize that these guys are risking their lives being in the ring because we don't know if they're gonna come out the same. Look at when you think of, this is more of a British history. Michael Watson. What happened when he fought Chris Eubank Sr. Then you had the opposite happen with Nigel Benn and McClellan.
Yep.
Gerald, that was absolutely crazy, but it does happen. And similar, it happened with Junior when he fought Nick Blackwell. So these things are happening in the sport. So I'm just happy that they're getting paid now, deservedly, and I'm just hoping that in the next upcoming years, should this league or whatever, should it work, just pay them handsomely, or pay also the women beautifully as well, so that everyone can just, you know, go in the ring, fight, and get paid for it, which they do deserve.
You know, you guys have been to fights live, so a lot of people probably haven't. When you're watching on TV, it's one thing, but when you're in the crowd and you hear the punches and the effects that they have, it's so much different than when you watch on TV. They know all these fighters, man, the heart and bravery that the men and women show, it's amazing. They know what they're doing, you know, they know why they do it, but it's a punishing sport. It's a punishing sport. Now they're smarter, they don't spar like they used to. But when you're live at a fight, and if you're close enough, you can hear the punches. And it's rough. It's brutal. And I'm not saying they should get money they don't deserve, but more often than not, fighters have not gotten the money they deserve. And I just don't, no one wants to see that happen.
No, yeah, 100% right. George, obviously we could spend hours upon hours upon hours, you know, talking boxing with you. But obviously we are coming up to the end of the show.
That was fast.
That wasn't even fast. No, we did overtime. You know what? Normally our shows we do half an hour, but because we had you, we wanted to do a little bit overtime just for the people.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It does. That's true. There's a lot of phrases that aren't true, but that one is true. That time flew by.
It flew by because we're having fun. But George, you always know anytime you could join us to talk boxing, of course. And I just want to remind the people, please head over to Round One with George. I'm obviously going to add the details in the description so you can follow. Latest interview. It happened with Jim Lampley, legend. George just has.
By the way, real quick, that picture of me standing by Jim, that was from a few months ago. I interviewed him for a doc series that I'll talk about later when I have more details. But even my wife said, "Man, you're smiling like a little kid in that picture," because I was with Jim Lampley, man. I was at his house in North Carolina, and he had just taken me on a tour of his house.
Wow.
So
it's amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Good memories.
That is amazing. People also, after this show, just as a tribute to George, just type on YouTube Legendary Nights, Moore versus Foreman, and just experience the great moments once again. And it was actually George who was involved in the project as well. So big up to George. Just before you go, George, I wanted to ask you, so from the fights that we've had in the new generation, what would you create in terms of a legendary tale? What fight would you choose? New school.
Like recent fights?
Let's call it last 10 years.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Boy, I would have to see. When I start thinking about that, I really get now because of this, I'm going to spend the next hour writing down a list.
Yeah.
Fights. I mean, boy.
All right, five. Let's go for five.
I'll tell you one that jumps to mind, the Fury Wilder trilogy, especially that first fight. That first fight, seeing Tyson Fury. By the way, I thought Tyson Fury won that first fight. I didn't think it was a draw. I thought he won, even though he was dropped twice or three times. To see Tyson Fury get dropped like that in the 12th round, and to see him get back up, and he was really giving it to Deontay at the end of that round. That was one right there that I would do a Legendary Nights on. But HBO dropped the ball. They should have done Legendary Nights on a ton of fights. Tyson Spinks, they never did a Legendary Nights on.
No, I know. That's, and also this is how even during the lead up to Spence and Crawford, you even heard Spence talk about Legendary Nights. He even said, I want this fight to be, remembered, and, created a documentary about it as well. So I think that could also be included, even though I'm a big Spence fan, but it was very heartbreaking just to see way Crawford absolutely just it was a dismantling, honestly.
Hey Trey, you've got some fun times ahead of you if you start watching Legendary Nights.
Oh man, so many episodes.
So many,
man. Taylor Serrano.
You gotta watch them all.
Taylor Serrano.
That would have been and they're having their trilogy. So that would have been a great Legendary Nights. We did a Legendary Nights on the Bo Holyfield trilogy.
Oh man.
Gotti Ward, they did sort of a Legendary Night, but so many fights that would be perfect.
Hearns versus Hagler. You've done Legendary Nights.
That was a Legendary Night.
One of my favorite EPs as well.
I'll tell you what.
Fire
Arguello, but one of the most heartbreaking ones was Julio Cesar Chavez and Melcher Taylor.
Oh man, that's
Just
sad.
And Holmes Cooney. It's not just about the fights; it's about the stories. And Trey, I'm working on a doc series that's going to be very much like Legendary Nights.
Yes.
When I have more information, and we have more time, and when it's announced, I'll talk about it more. But it's about the stories that lead up to the fights, and the fight, and then what happened afterwards. Man, Ra, you're gonna have fun watching Legendary Nights.
Ra's gonna have so much fun, but George, thank you so much, my brother. Thank you so much. God bless you and your family.
Same to you guys.
Everyone that's tuned into the show. This was obviously a special roundup, a tribute show, just to remind people as well. RIP to the legendary, the great George Foreman, and also RIP to Colin Hart, a true legend of the sport as well. I know there's obviously been a few people that's passed on as well, but I know it's a sad time, but let's use this as a celebration as well. Ra, also big up to you. Thank you so much for covering for Biyenge. Biyenge is obviously not feeling too well. Ra, I'm also going to add the description to Punch Out Boxing as well. That's the channel that he's covering, but he's also part of the family as well, representing D-Rock Clothing. But before we wrap up the show, let's hear from our sponsors just very quickly. D-Rock Clothing. Yes, people. So that's D-Rock in association with iBoxingHub. So take advantage of the discount code, which is iBoxingHub24. You get 40% off. Head over to the description so you can utilize that code. But yes, people, this is obviously the end of the show. Just wanted to God bless our guests and God bless the community and God bless the iBoxingHub family for the great work that they've been doing throughout the week as well. Ra, as a little sweetener, I'm obviously going to just play a little last clip of Legendary Nights just to ensure that you go back and watch it.
Somebody once asked me, is George Foreman winning the heavyweight title at age 45 tougher than Jack Nicklaus winning the Masters at age 46? And as much as I love Jack Nicklaus, nobody was hitting Jack Nicklaus. Michael Moorer was still punching George Foreman.
And once again, heavyweight champion of the world, Big George Foreman.
Michael Moorer later recaptured a heavyweight belt, but lost it to Evander Holyfield. George Foreman had never openly sought specific redemption for his demise against Ali and Zaire, but it's revealing that he chose to wear the same trunks on this night that he had worn in the jungle 20 years before.
Yeah, so RIP once again to George Foreman. And Rob, just give us your feedback, next week on Legendary Nights.
Yes.
It's a tremendous watch. And Jim Lampley looks so young there compared to, when you've interviewed him. So people, make sure you follow
You know what? I know we're ending this, but I got to tell you, Jim Lampley, yes, we all get older. You know, his hair's a little grayer. But when he starts talking boxing, he's Jim Lampley, and he's back May 2. He's calling fights again.
What?
May 2nd. He is calling
No
fights
way.
again. He is
What's
back.
he gonna be calling? What's he gonna be calling?
He's calling the Fatal Fury card in Times Square
Wow.
with Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, and
Wow.
Teofimo. Jim Lampley is back on the microphone. That's what I interviewed him about. He's back. I don't know who he's calling the fights with, but Jim Lampley is back to calling fights.
Wow, look, that's a live announcement for the community. You're hearing it, you know, first here from George. Jim Lampley is back. That would be truly tremendous, because that was obviously one of the reasons why it was. I don't know if you guys remember it, just before we wrap up, of course, you know, when HBO was announcing that it was the final show, you saw how Lampley was, you know, he was tearful, and
yep,
no one knew what was going to happen next. And you've seen how the sport has gone. Productions that HBO Boxing used to put together are still not even on the level of what people are doing now. Like,
I agree, and I'm biased, but I agree.
Biased as well.
I agree. But what I think is the biggest injustice for boxing fans, maybe not the biggest, but that was 2018 when HBO said we're out.
Yeah.
No one, and that's 7 years ago. Nobody contacted Jim Lampley about a job calling fights again. He said there were little hits here and there, but no one offered him a job. He didn't think he was ever going to call a fight again. And then Turkey comes along and says, "Hey, I want you," and Jim Lampley is going to be calling fights. And I can't wait. I can't wait for May the 2nd to hear Jim Lampley back calling fights. And he's so excited. He's 75 years old. He doesn't sound like he's 75. He's excited, man. I can't wait. I can't wait for May 2nd.
No, big up to you. And people, just as a reminder again, just head over to One Round with George so you can see Jim Lampley just talking about him just being back. Remember, the moment it happened, that's what I always kind of remember him for. Just, you know, those little moments as children, you hear just little things, but yeah, just an absolute legend. But guys, God bless you both once again.
Thank you, fellas.
Ra, can you also just let people know how they could follow you, Punch Out Boxing?
Yeah. As we got on screen, Ra_Hokum, that's my Instagram and Twitter, and of course Punch Out Boxing. We're on Facebook and YouTube. Check out the latest series of interviews I've done with contestants at the Riyadh season Grand Prix tournament, because these are unknown kids at the moment. Opportunity, one day some of these kids will be superstars, so get to know them now. That's what I say.
Love that.
Yeah, Riyadh season, big time. And George, I know you've obviously got your socials. We're gonna add both Punch Out and One Round with George on the description at the bottom, but how can people follow you and just DM you and, you know, just send you good messages, man?
Yeah, One Round with George on YouTube, George Jakovic, G Jakovic on Instagram. Same thing in Raw. I love that you're doing stuff with younger fighters, because we all know the stars and the champs, but somebody's going to take their place one day. And you're probably talking to some fighters who we're going to be talking about in 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, we've got one that we think champion next, you know, Moses Atuma. But for me, I'm not going to lie, if you're going to talk about Moses Atuma, we have to talk about my guy, Wardley. Fabio Wardley. He's you know, going to be potentially fighting Pulev, I believe, for the regular title. So should he win that and Usyk decides to, you know, separate the belts or whatever, he would obviously be elevated. And this is kind of one of the reasons why I kind of like the multiple organizations. So it just allows more champions, and it just allows people to just, you know, make their own history. So
I agree. I know we got to end this, but real quick, I hear that. What I hate is the super champions, the interim champions, the regular champions.
Yeah.
Come on, man. When I grew up, it was 2 belts. It was WBA, WBC. Then the IBF came around. But now all this, oh, he's a super champion. Oh, he's a regular champion. And they have the audacity to announce people as interim champions. You're not a champion. What the hell is an interim champion? You're not a champion, but that's another way for those sanctioning bodies to get money. Yes, exactly. So, well, look, I'm sorry. 12 minutes ago, you said we're ending the show, so I'm just gonna
No, George, this is just the energy that we have, man. So big up to you. You know, anytime you could obviously come on and talk boxing, and hopefully we can do a special where we can kind of break down the legendary nights, man. I really, we've been kind of talking about that. I know you've got your own project that's coming out, but I like to relive those moments there.
Me too. Yeah, I'm down anytime.
I'm down for that as well. People, God bless you all, and just tune in to the next show, which is obviously going to be on Wednesday. The roundup is back, and we obviously got some announcements that's going to be coming up in the next few weeks. But people, God bless you, and have a tremendous evening. Peace and love.
It's another band. All the Muslim calls now, whichever get up. I start my card with a sweet one bliss. Someone flicks me.